Antonio Ribeiro's weathered hands trembled slightly as he curled into the cold corner behind the bakery, the only shelter he could find on a night that bit through thin layers like a blade. The city's hum faded into a distant murmur, leaving him alone with his ragged breath and the ghost of a life once lived. At 73, Antonio was a man sculpted by time and hardship, a silent witness to battles both external and internal. His eyes, deep-set and clouded, flickered with memories too sharp to hold, yet too heavy to release. The worn fabric of his jacket, patched and faded, barely kept out the chill, but it was all he had. To the bustling world outside, he was invisible, a shadow cast aside by progress and indifference. The bakery's backroom, once a place of warmth and comfort, was now his refuge, a stolen moment of safety in a life defined by loss and neglect. He did not see himself as a criminal for seeking warmth. Survival was not a choice, but a desperate necessity. Antonio's mind drifted to distant days, fields of fire and smoke, the roar of conflict that once shaped him into a soldier. He remembered the sharp orders, the weight of a rifle, the faces of comrades lost and saved. But those memories now belonged to a world that had moved on, leaving him behind like a discarded relic. His spirit carried the scars of war that no metal could heal, and the loneliness of a hero forgotten. As dawn crept closer, Antonio sensed the cold shifting around him, an unwelcome reminder of how fragile his existence had become. The harsh glare of the outside world waited, ready to judge and condemn the man who had only tried to endure. In that quiet moment, the line between victim and offender blurred, revealing the raw vulnerability of a man trapped between his past valor and present despair. Judge Larissa Markov sat behind her imposing oak desk, the weight of years etched into the fine lines around her eyes as she stared at the faded photograph before her. It was not just any case file that lay open. It was a fragmented story of a man whose existence seemed to blur the rigid boundaries of law and justice she had long upheld. The photograph, worn at the edges, showed Antonio Ribeiro, a face marked by hardship, eyes that held storms, yet beneath them, a fragile flicker of humanity that refused to be extinguished. Larissa had always believed in the clarity of the law, black and white, right and wrong, guilty or innocent. Yet, as she pored over Antonio's story, each line in the report pulled her deeper into a labyrinth of doubt and empathy. She read about his past as a soldier, about battles fought not just on foreign soil but within the chambers of his own mind, and how life after war had unraveled him into shadows of society. The clinical detachment of the law faltered as she recognized the familiar weight of suffering, the invisible wounds that no statute could heal. Her own reflection in the polished surface of the desk confronted her, a woman who had worn the armor of justice for decades, but whose heart beat quietly with compassion. In that stillness, Larissa felt the first tremors of awakening. She recalled the nights she, too, had faced ghosts of choices made, of mercy denied, of humanity lost in the pursuit of order. Antonio's story was not just a case. It was a mirror held up to her own concealed vulnerabilities. The realization struck with the force of a tidal wave. Justice was not merely about punishment, but understanding. It was about seeing the fractured souls beneath the crimes, about acknowledging pain that did not fit neatly into legal definitions. Larissa's mind swirled with conflicting emotions, duty, doubt, sorrow, and yet, within that storm, a fragile hope began to take root. Perhaps this was what justice truly required, a willingness to look beyond the surface, to embrace complexity, and to dare to forgive. As the courtroom awaited her verdict, Judge Larissa Markov felt the weight of her own awakening, a subtle yet profound transformation that would ripple beyond this case and into the very core of her being. The line between judge and human blurred, revealing not weakness, but the deepest strength, a readiness to see the world through the fractured lens of compassion. The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional creak of wooden benches, but beneath this stillness, a storm of unspoken tension simmered. Antonio sat hunched in the defendant's chair, his gaunt frame shrinking beneath the harsh courtroom lights that seemed to spotlight every line of weariness etched into his face. His eyes, once vibrant with the fire of youth and battle, now flickered with a fragile mix of fear, resignation, and something deeper, a yearning to be understood, to have his story heard beyond the cold labels of crime and punishment. Across the room, his lawyer, Elena Morales, adjusted her glasses with deliberate calm, the weight of the case settling heavily on her shoulders. Elena was not just a legal advocate, she was a fierce guardian of truth beneath the layers of law's impersonal veneer. Her gaze, sharp and compassionate, never wavered from Antonio as she prepared to speak, knowing that the courtroom would not simply hear facts today. They needed to feel the human heart beating beneath them. As the prosecutor outlined the charges with clinical precision, painting Antonio as a man who had crossed society's unforgiving line, Elena's mind worked to dismantle that narrative, not with denial, but with an unveiling of complexity. She spoke slowly, deliberately, weaving the fragmented pieces of Antonio's past into the present moment. She recounted the echoes of war that still haunted him, the wounds unseen but no less real, the loss of comrades, the relentless battles fought in the silence of his mind. Her words drew a tapestry of suffering that the courtroom walls could scarcely contain. Elena's voice softened when she described the moments of vulnerability, Antonio's desperate attempts to survive in a world that had moved on without him, the nights spent shivering in shadows, the isolation that gnawed at his spirit. She challenged the jury to look beyond the surface, to see a man broken by circumstance rather than a villain born of malice. Her arguments were not just legal maneuvers, they were an impassioned plea for empathy, a call to recognize the fragile humanity that the law often overlooks. Throughout the proceedings, Antonio's gaze occasionally met Elena's, a silent exchange of trust and hope. In that connection, the courtroom felt less like a battleground and more like a fragile sanctuary, a place where justice might bend toward mercy, where understanding could bridge the chasm between judgment and compassion. Judge Larissa Markov observed silently, the threads of her own awakening weaving ever tighter with each word spoken. As the day wore on, the courtroom's cold formality gave way to a deeper reckoning, a collective confrontation with the complexities of human frailty and the limits of justice. Elena's intervention was not just a defense, it was a transformative act, urging all present to confront their own preconceptions and the uncomfortable truth that beneath every crime lies a story waiting to be told. Antonio's past unfolded like a fragile tapestry, each thread woven with pain and resilience, loss and fleeting moments of hope. Born in a small coastal town, his childhood was marked by the salty scent of the sea and the rough hands of his father, a fisherman whose love was measured in silent endurance rather than words. Antonio learned early that life demanded strength, that tenderness was a luxury often denied. His mother's absence lingered like a ghost, a quiet void that shaped the shadows in his heart, leaving him with a hunger for belonging that no boy should bear alone. As a young man, Antonio found purpose in the military, a refuge where order promised to heal the chaos inside him. The uniform was more than fabric. It was armor against the vulnerabilities he dared not show. But the battlefield revealed horrors no discipline could erase. He witnessed friends torn apart by violence, lives extinguished in moments that replayed relentlessly in the dark recesses of his mind. Each mission left scars not on his skin but etched deep within his soul, invisible wounds that festered in silence, breeding despair. Returning home was not a homecoming, but a descent into isolation. The world he once knew had shifted, indifferent to the battles he continued to fight alone. Sleep became elusive, haunted by nightmares where screams echoed and shadows clawed at his sanity. He wandered through days like a ghost, carrying memories heavy as chains, his spirit fracturing under the weight of unspoken trauma. The man who had once stood tall now struggled to find footing in a life that no longer made sense. In the void left by war, Antonio's desperation grew, twisting into acts that betrayed the principles he once fought to defend. Addiction seeped in, a poisonous bomb dulling the relentless ache within. Relationships crumbled under the strain of his internal tempest. Trust became a fragile dream slipping through trembling fingers. Yet beneath the ruin, a flicker of the boy who had once dreamed by the sea remained, a quiet longing for redemption, a hope that the fractured pieces of his life might someday be mended. Antonio's story was not one of villainy, but of a man trapped between the past and an uncertain future, caught in the chasm where pain and humanity collide. To understand him was to see beyond the surface, to hear the silent cries beneath the chaos, and to confront the brutal truth that some battles rage long after the guns fall silent. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as the prosecution called its first witness, a woman whose eyes held a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Maria Delgado stepped forward, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she clutched the small stack of photographs she was about to present. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of memories she wished she could forget. Each image was a shard of the past, moments frozen in time that the prosecution argued painted Antonio not as a victim of circumstance, but as a man driven by choice and impulse. As Maria described the events captured in those photos, Elena watched Antonio's face tighten, a flicker of pain flashing across his eyes. It was more than just evidence. It was a confrontation with the past, a reminder that even the most hidden corners of a person's life can be dragged into the unforgiving light of judgment. Yet Elena knew that the surface told only half the story, that the shadows behind those images held truths that the prosecution could not see. When the next witness took the stand, James Harper, a former comrade from Antonio's unit, the room seemed to hold its breath. James's presence was a stark contrast. His broad shoulders and confident tone suggested certainty, but beneath that exterior lurked a complex mix of loyalty, guilt, and unspoken regrets. He spoke of Antonio's courage in combat, the brotherhood forged in fire, but also of the man's gradual unraveling, the subtle signs of trauma masked by forced bravado, the silent screams hidden behind clenched jaws. James's testimony peeled back another layer, revealing the fragility beneath Antonio's hardened exterior. Elena seized this moment, carefully steering the narrative towards understanding rather than condemnation. She pressed gently on the delicate balance between duty and despair, asking James to reflect not just on Antonio's actions, but on the silent suffering that had accompanied them. It was a delicate dance, a weaving of facts with empathy, a challenge to the courtroom's instinct to judge swiftly. Then came the evidence that cut deepest: medical reports, psychological evaluations, and journal entries that Elena had painstakingly gathered. The dry, clinical language of these documents belied the raw human pain they encapsulated. Antonio's own words, penned in moments of desperate clarity, spoke of a mind trapped in a relentless storm, of nightmares that refused to fade, of a heart weighed down by loss and isolation. As Elena read aloud these fragments of his inner world, the courtroom seemed to tilt, the sterile walls absorbing the vulnerability laid bare before them. In the hushed silence that followed, Elena felt the shift, a collective recognition that Antonio was not merely a defendant, but a man haunted by invisible wounds, struggling to reclaim his humanity amidst the ruins of his psyche. The witnesses and evidence were not just elements of a case. They were voices in a chorus demanding that justice be tempered with compassion, that the complexity of a fractured soul be met with understanding rather than condemnation. In the quiet aftermath of the courtroom storm, when the echoes of arguments and testimonies had finally faded, Antonio found himself alone with the weight of his choices pressing heavily upon his chest. Recognition, both external and internal, did not come in the form of loud proclamations or sweeping gestures, but in the subtle shifts that began to unravel the tightly wound armor he had worn for so long. It was in the soft, tentative nods from those who once judged him harshly, the slow but genuine steps toward forgiveness from the people around him, and, most crucially, the fragile but growing acknowledgement within himself that his past did not have to define his future. The process of making amends was neither linear nor painless. Each attempt to repair the damage felt like treading a narrow path, where one misstep threatened to plunge him back into despair. Antonio grappled with the haunting memories of actions he could neither erase nor excuse, carrying a guilt that settled deep in his bones. Yet, paradoxically, it was this very acceptance of responsibility that began to crack the hardened shell around his heart. He allowed himself to confront the pain he had long buried, the faces of those he had hurt, the bridges he had burned, and the innocence lost along the way. In moments of quiet reflection, Antonio started reaching out, to family members estranged by years of silence, to old friends wary of his return, and even to the ghosts of his past, embodied in the journal entries he had kept hidden. Writing became a balm and a mirror, forcing him to face uncomfortable truths but also offering a space where healing could begin. These pages bore witness to his remorse and his resolve to change, a testament to a man no longer willing to be imprisoned by his mistakes. The world around him responded slowly, but perceptibly. Conversations once fraught with accusation softened into dialogues seeking understanding. His community, initially resistant, began to see beyond the labels, recognizing the man's earnest efforts to rebuild. Yet Antonio knew that true repair was not about seeking approval but about embodying change, living each day with humility, with patience, and with the quiet courage to confront the shadows within. Therapy sessions became lifelines, spaces where Antonio could unravel the complex threads of his trauma under the guidance of a compassionate listener. These encounters were raw and difficult, exposing vulnerabilities that threatened to overwhelm him, but also illuminating pathways toward reconciliation with himself. Step by step, the fractures in his psyche began to mend, not with miraculous ease, but through persistent, painstaking work. Ultimately, Antonio's journey toward acknowledgement and restitution was a testament to the human capacity for growth amid brokenness. It was a story not of redemption as a destination, but as a continuous process, a fragile dance between past and present, pain and hope, failure and the unwavering desire to make things right. In this unfolding, he found a deeper understanding of himself and a tentative peace that, though fragile, whispered of possibility beyond the shadows. Antonio's life transformed gradually but profoundly, shaped by the quiet reckonings within and the ripples they sent outward into every corner of his existence. What had once been a routine marked by avoidance and numbness slowly gave way to one filled with intention and vulnerability. The man who had once been defined by the weight of his mistakes began to reclaim pieces of himself, not through grand gestures or sudden epiphanies, but through small, deliberate acts of healing. He embraced the daily rituals of self-care, something he had long neglected, simple things like waking with the sun, allowing himself moments of stillness before the chaos of the day, and confronting his emotions rather than burying them. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of his transformation, providing a sanctuary where Antonio could unravel the tangled threads of trauma, shame, and regret, and gradually weave them into a narrative that included hope and resilience. Relationships, once fractured or severed, were slowly mended through honesty and patience. Antonio reached out to those he had hurt or disappointed, not expecting immediate forgiveness, but willing to listen and make amends without defensiveness. He learned the difficult art of vulnerability, discovering that true connection required openness to pain as well as joy. With time, these efforts rekindled bonds that had seemed irreparably broken. Professionally, Antonio sought to redefine his sense of purpose. No longer driven solely by duty or obligation, he found meaning in work that aligned with his desire to contribute positively to the world, whether through mentoring others who faced similar struggles or engaging in community projects that fostered healing and growth. This new path was not free of setbacks, but it was marked by a commitment to progress rather than perfection. Spiritually and emotionally, Antonio's transformation manifested in a newfound capacity for empathy and self-compassion. He began to forgive himself, a process as challenging as it was essential, recognizing that self-forgiveness was not about absolving guilt, but about freeing himself to live fully and authentically. This shift allowed him to move beyond the paralysis of shame and into a life where hope and regret could coexist without annihilating one another. In the quiet moments of reflection, Antonio often marveled at how far he had come, from a place of darkness and isolation to one where light, however dim or fleeting, could touch his life. His journey was ongoing, a daily practice of embracing change and uncertainty, but it was also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of renewal even after the deepest wounds. In the fragile space where pain met hope, Antonio began to discover the true power of emotional connection, a lifeline that tethered him back from the abyss and nurtured the slow, steady process of his spiritual recovery. It was not merely the act of being heard or understood by others that brought solace, but the profound experience of feeling seen in his entirety, the scars, the regrets, and the flickers of resilience all laid bare without fear of judgment. This emotional intimacy, once foreign and terrifying, gradually became the bedrock upon which he rebuilt his fractured sense of self. Antonio's interactions shifted from guarded exchanges to authentic dialogues, where vulnerability was met with empathy rather than dismissal. In these moments, the rawness of his pain was not a weakness but a bridge, a connection that invited others to share their own struggles and, in turn, offered him a profound sense of belonging. It was through this shared humanity that Antonio learned healing was not a solitary journey, but a collective one, woven from threads of mutual understanding and compassion. Within this web of connection, Antonio nurtured forgiveness, not only from others but, crucially, from himself. The act of forgiving became a spiritual turning point, dissolving the heavy chains of self-condemnation and opening pathways to renewal. He realized that to heal was to accept the entirety of his story, embracing both the darkness and the light with equal grace. This acceptance did not erase the past, but transformed it into a foundation for growth. Antonio's spiritual recovery deepened as he engaged with practices that grounded him in the present moment, mindfulness, meditation, and moments of quiet reflection. These practices helped him cultivate inner peace amid turmoil, teaching him to observe his thoughts and feelings without becoming overwhelmed. In doing so, he reclaimed a sense of agency over his mind and heart, strengthening the resilience that would carry him forward. Ultimately, the emotional connections Antonio forged and the spiritual insights he embraced intertwined to create a holistic healing. This was not a cure or an endpoint, but a dynamic, evolving process, a delicate balance of holding on to hope while acknowledging pain, of seeking connection while honoring solitude. Through this intricate dance, Antonio found not only recovery but a renewed sense of purpose and belonging, affirming that even in the aftermath of profound struggle, the human spirit can rise, gently and persistently, toward the light. Antonio's journey back into society was neither swift nor linear. It unfolded like a slow, deliberate awakening from a long, isolating hibernation. Emerging from the cocoon of his inner battles, he faced the external world with a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope. The once familiar spaces, streets, workplaces, social gatherings, now seemed both intimidating and full of potential, as if he were learning to navigate them anew, relearning the art of belonging. Initially, the simplest social interactions were fraught with anxiety. Antonio grappled with self-doubt, haunted by the fear that others would judge him for his past, or that he no longer fit into the communities he once took for granted. But instead of retreating, he chose small steps of engagement, attending community events, reconnecting with old friends, and volunteering in local programs. These acts, though modest, became profound gestures of reclaiming his place in the social fabric. Antonio also sought support groups where shared experiences forged a sense of solidarity and understanding. In these spaces, he found others who carried their own scars and stories, which made his own pain feel less isolating. The collective empathy offered a balm to his wounded spirit and encouraged him to practice patience with himself and others. Professionally, he re-entered the workforce cautiously, choosing environments that valued transparency and growth rather than perfection. He found fulfillment in roles that allowed him to contribute meaningfully while honoring his own vulnerabilities. Through mentorship and collaboration, Antonio rebuilt his professional identity, not as a man defined by past mistakes, but as someone capable of growth, resilience, and positive impact. Throughout this reintegration, Antonio continually balanced the tension between independence and connection. He recognized the importance of maintaining boundaries to protect his well-being, while also embracing the risks inherent in forming new relationships and deepening old ones. This delicate dance taught him that belonging is not about perfection or acceptance by all, but about finding spaces and people where authenticity is welcomed. Gradually, as Antonio's confidence and trust in himself and others grew, the world that had once felt alien and unforgiving transformed into a landscape of possibility. His journey back into society was a testament to human resilience, an ongoing process marked by courage, humility, and the enduring hope that no matter how far one falls, the path to reconnection and purpose is always within reach. Antonio stood at the edge of a quiet park as the sun dipped low, casting a warm, golden glow over the world. The air was still, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves and distant laughter, sounds that once seemed unreachable, now inviting and familiar. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace that was hard-won but deeply earned. The weight that had once pressed so heavily on his chest had softened, replaced by a fragile yet growing lightness. Antonio knew the scars of his past would never completely fade, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they were threads woven into the tapestry of his life, reminders of pain, yes, but also of strength, resilience, and the capacity for renewal. Looking forward, he embraced uncertainty with a quiet courage. The future was no longer a source of dread, but a canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences, connections, and purpose. Antonio understood that healing was not a destination but a continuous journey, one he was no longer afraid to walk. With a soft smile, he took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to meet whatever came next with an open heart. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but it was illuminated by hope, a hope born from his own perseverance, the bonds he had rebuilt, and the profound understanding that even after darkness, light persists.